Welcome everyone to today's episode of Navigating Now, coming to you Thursday at 3 p.m. like every Thursday at 3 p.m. I know that this is a different person in the seat today. Instead of Anthony, it's me, Anjana Raj, a consultant here at Thoughtium. Very excited to be in the seat having this discussion with some of my favorite people. So today we're going to talk about work in progress, but mostly about what we do with that work and how we design it for the people that we work with. Navigating Now is bringing the series to all of you as a three-part series. The first one was last week, and this week we're going to talk about redefining your workplace. And with me are three of my esteemed colleagues, Grift Krenbrick, Aaron Fleckenstein, and Margot Massoud. Guys, you want to introduce yourselves? Grift, do you want to go?
Happy to. So hello, everyone. Griff Kernbrink here out of Thoughtium West. I am a vice president within our learning and development practice. And what I'm really passionate about is helping organizations really start with the end in mind. What are they trying to accomplish, and build cultures that are based on learning, but that are also based on treating failure as iterations in a process. So I'm really, really excited to be discussing redefining our workplaces with some of my favorite folks as well today.
Margot?
I am a consultant at Thoughtium, and I work on the PPM space. But I'm super excited about the conversation that we are having both internally and externally with all of you folks listening today. And I think we're going to really dig into some exciting topics. So excited to dig in.
And Aaron.
Yeah, thanks, Anjana. I'm Erin. I'm a managing consultant here at Thoughtium, and I work really closely with Margot on our portfolio and PPM practice area as well. My passion is building strong relationships with our clients to solve complex problems. So I get really excited about the conversation as well today, as I know it is front and center with a lot of things that people are dealing with. So excited to jump right in.
Yes. And so like I mentioned earlier, this is the second episode of this series, Work in Progress, really tackling the hybrid workplace and what it looks like for today's world. We're going to be talking a little bit about what the last episode entailed. So I came in last week, talked about the data of what the marketplace looks like and what, our community was feeling. But we also, have data this week around what people are feeling when decisions are being made about the hybrid workplace. Grift, do you want to walk us through the data from the Limeade report?
Yeah, absolutely. And, a couple of these data points you want to share, we know, the situation is really fluid. And one of the things we definitely want to stress is as we go through and we look at not just this data, but this conversation, this is meant to be a conversation. This is meant to be an ongoing conversation. And so take that perspective as we continue our discussion along. But if we pull up some of the results from Limeade, now just to give a little bit of a background, on Limeade, they did a study sent out to about 7,800 people. I believe at the end, the data set was around 5,000 respondents across a number of developed countries. And they asked a number of really important questions around the future of work at their various workplaces. So we can go ahead and bring up some of those slides. The first thing that they asked, if we go back a few here, the first thing they asked was around just levels of anxiety as it relates to returning to the workplace. So if we go back a couple more slides here, the question was posed around a number of different factors. One more slide before this, and they asked what was the top source of anxiety. And what was interesting about this is not just the sources that were cited as big areas of anxiety, but the one thing we just want to call out is everyone has some sort or some level of anxiety as they think about what the future of their workplace and their work environment looks like. So you can see, not surprisingly, COVID-19 still very much on the top of mind for a lot of folks. What I found really interesting out of this data point is that the loss of flexibility was really close to COVID-19. And so we think about all the changes we made to our lives, to our working arrangements last year. we can see people are feeling a little bit uneasy around what that means for how their working arrangement, their working style, their communication with their team will be moving forward. So a couple of things there. Another set of questions that Limeade asked these same respondents was around different elements of their work and what had either increased or stayed the same from 2020 as it related back to 2019. And just a couple of interesting things here. I know we definitely think of 2020 as a year of just pure exhaustion, but a lot of folks felt like they got a lot of things done. And so one of the things we just wanted to call out is that 4 out of every 5 of these respondents said their productivity levels either increased or stayed the same as it related to their previous working style. So I just want to say, to everyone listening and everyone who was part of this report and everyone out there, congratulations. I know, in the face of such an exceedingly large amount of odds, people were able to get their jobs done and do so effectively. So just a really cool thing we wanted to call out. A couple of things we did want to mention, though, that in that moment where we all were forced to reprioritize and rearrange our working setup, there was a lot more flexibility. And I think we heard the transition from work-life balance to work-life blend officially take hold to stay, I think, in 2020. And that flexibility was there. And I think one of the things we hear loud and clear, 7 out of 10 in this report, but we hear it anecdotally all the time, is how do we make sure we don't lose that flexibility that we were given? Because we clearly, as we just talked about, people are still getting their work done. So if we have that flexibility, how do we make sure we hold on to it? The one other thing we do want to bring up here is, around connection and work from home. And we do recognize, this is a little bit of a house divided issue. And I don't mean that in a negative sense, but, as we think about this path forward, people are going to want different things, and we have to be, willing to accommodate those. And we'll talk a little bit more as we get into our conversation. But just one thing specifically we'll call out here, when asked about, the time spent working from home, basically down the middle split between the folks that wanted to have that same amount of work from home time and the people that are looking for a bit more of a structured workplace environment to go back to. So again, not necessarily saying one way is better than the other, but just the fact that there is a very different set of needs out there and a pretty balanced set of differentiation. And the one other thing we would call out on this, I know I said one more, but just give me one more here, Anjana, on this slide, is that people did still feel connected to their social networks, to their workplace colleagues. And it's not in this report, but I do want to call to another report that I read recently from Microsoft on the state of remote work that did mention that although communication and connection is still there, we do actually see a little bit, and this is in the data of how Microsoft connects millions, if not billions of people in the world, that our social networks, our connection networks, the direct people we're working with and innovating with has shrunk. And that's not surprising, right? As we've been in our homes, our ability to expand and to talk to a lot of people has taken a little bit of a hit. But this serves as an opportunity for us because we do have we have those communications. We have expanded our amount of communication, and now it's just on all of us to continue to expand the network of people we're communicating with.
Really good point. And I can definitely, even anecdotally speak on my network getting smaller just from the amount of time and resources it takes to upkeep that and really focusing on your inner circle for that energy. Great. What's the next set of data telling us?
Yeah, and so as we talk about this is a conversation, or at least it needs to be a conversation. One of the things we did want to call out from the Limeade report is that a lot of folks aren't really feeling heard. And so what we're seeing on the slide here, a question that was posed to the same set of respondents was around, how do you feel your organization is asking for your feedback? And specifically, they just asked straight up, do you feel like your feedback has been taken into account in terms of return to work policies or procedures? And around 3 out of every 5 individuals said no.
Wow.
Said no. So we see a lot of folks out there saying they don't really feel like they have a proverbial seat at the table in this conversation. If we transition to the next slide, not only are we seeing that some folks don't feel included in the discussion, but what that potentially could lead to is the feeling that your organization doesn't necessarily have a deep care for you. And so we're seeing on the left side of the screen here, a question that was posed to these respondents was around the feeling that their organization really cares about them. And you can see only 16% strongly agreed with that statement. Interestingly, back in March of 2020, that number was 31%. So we do see
Wow.
a deterioration in the trust that people are feeling in their organizations. Now, we do still have around 50% saying they at least agree, but I think we can all agree that that number should be higher. We should be having better trusting relationships with our organization and with with the people we spend so much time with, right?
Yeah. And I
One
mean,
other thing.
even if
Oh, please
it's,
go ahead.
yeah, I mean, just not just trust, but the fact this sentence, I feel like my organization cares about me, is so basic needs. It's like trust is even a level above that, in my opinion. Like if I'm spending 40 hours, minimum talking and working with my colleagues and providing 81% productivity, then the least I could get back is that my organization cares about me. I see a bunch of nodding heads. Any other one wants to talk? Add some color.
Just to speak to what Griff mentioned earlier, is that it is kind of a divided house in terms of a lot of people feel really strongly about wanting to work remotely, and a lot of people feel really strongly about wanting to be back in the office. So there are just a lot of really strong feelings, and so it's a difficult conversation to have. And I think just kind of creating this space, which is what we're trying to do internally and modeling here for all of you, is to just create the space to have these conversations and to come at it from a place of empathy and compassion. And I think just with an open mind, as cliche as that may sound, it's critical to come to the table with that.
Yeah, appreciate it. Let's go back to the data.
Yeah, and I think just to build, Margo, that's such a great point to call out. And the last thing I want to bring up before we dive into our deeper conversation is that, like it or not, people managers, like, this is your time to step up, because as we have communication networks shrinking, the reality is most people see their organization basically through the attachment they have with their direct manager. And what we see on the right side of the screen here is, if you look at the question, do you feel supported by your managers and leaders in improving your well-being? This question was actually segmented between managers and above and individual contributors. And so it's already not great to see that, to a very large extent, the entire population is below 50%, below, not even 1 out of every 2 people feels like they can really say yes to that statement. What the other, the big implication here is, what we can see is that individual contributors don't feel that with their direct managers. And we know, as this pandemic has raged on, that need for a really strong leader and that connection to your organization has a direct ripple effect to how someone can show up and do their job effectively. So one of the things that, we hope everyone takes away from this is, this is a really big chance for us to not just be better leaders in business, but just be better human beings, and make that space to listen to each other, and ultimately try to develop a bit more of that sense of care for one another, because it will show up in business results. We can promise that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Griff. Let's keep going. Let's do one more. Oh, before that. So I think it looks like that was the data from the Limeade report. Before we dive into the polls, I want to get everyone's consensus about, what does the landscape look like, and you spoke to, Griff, the reasoning for us to be able to come into the table and have this conversation. What's the importance about tapping into our community to get this information as well? Margo, do you want to speak on it?
I think the important thing is, like, just creating this space and having the opportunity to have these difficult discussions.
Yeah, agreed. So let's look at the data from our polls. Erin, do you want to walk us through what we saw from our community?
Sure. So just like last time, we wanted to poll our internal community, right, our networks, and try to add to the data just to get a better, clear view of kind of what we're seeing, not only from the data that's being produced by large companies doing large scale, but really tapping into our own network and hearing what we're kind of hearing in our home bases. And so to build on the questions that Anjana asked last week, we kind of took them one step further and tried to understand a little bit more about how people were feeling. So the first one was about how confident were they in their organization to navigate through this hybrid approach and to really have these conversations. And what the data was telling us is that there's really not a strong level of confidence in the capability for their organizations to successfully kind of launch this. You've got only 36% somewhat confident, right? And then 18% extremely confident, and the rest of the workforce that replied in our poll not having a lot of confidence in their organization at this current moment in time.
Yeah. And it feels like a consistent story with what we're seeing maybe from the Limeade report to even our own community. And when we look at this about confidence in our organizations, what can organizations do to instill confidence in their workforce?
Yeah, we asked that as a follow-up build-up question too, right? Because we wanted to understand if people weren't feeling confident, what would make them kind of get a little bit more confident as we move forward in this approach. And in a very large set of the population, being part of the solution was really kind of the stance, having a seat at the table, as we kind of talked about. And then that was quickly followed by the rest of the population, or another large set of the population, with this idea of commit to revisiting. So giving the space, as we talked about, for people to have views, right, and hear what is working and what's not working, and knowing that this isn't going to be solved today, right? It's going to be an ongoing conversation that we need to continue to revisit and talk through and really work through as a team.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of opinions and narratives being swirled around. And I mean, of course, with those data and stories and experiences, there's, of course, myths and misconceptions that are also forming. What would you say, Grift, are some myths and misconceptions that are forming around the hybrid workplace?
Yeah, I think there are a lot swirling out there, and the one that really strikes with me, that I think needs to be debunked by everyone, is this idea that we're in a race right now and there's a distinct finish line that we're all trying to get to. Because the reality is changing on us, and work is transforming, and uncertainty is becoming a currency, and we have to be willing to be okay with that. And so I think one of the things I'd love, for everyone to walk away from this, is to not think about just getting through this, but let's work together in this, because the change that we're seeing now, related to the hybrid model, change is not going to go away. So how do we become more comfortable with it? How do we rely on each other? Back to Aaron's point around trust, and how do we rely on each other to make sure that we can do that effectively?
Yeah, Margot, a myth or a misconception that you want to speak to?
That the best collaboration happens in person. I think that, we've all proven how amazingly well we've been able to collaborate and just do the work in the last, 15, 18 months, the last eternity that we've been living through. If we, instead of just getting through this or rushing back to normal, I think what really makes my eye twitch when I'm having conversations on this subject is when people say that we're going to go back to work, because we have all been working for the last 18 months. We've just been working in a very different capacity. And, I actually think that this is a really pivotal time for us to kind of talk about some of these myths and just kind of challenge the norms that we had set in place for our typical 8 to 5, 9 to 5 jobs, and kind of be more intentional about, when we gather, why are we meeting, and, not to devalue the fact that we've all been working. So back to work and back to normal, I'm striking from this entire conversation.
I agree with you. Yes.
We have been working, and the previous normal wasn't great. So I'd like to redefine our normal. And I'm super excited to just do that with Thoughtium and encourage everybody else to do that as well. That's absolutely what we're bringing to you today.
Erin, do you have a myth or a misconception that you want to speak to?
Yeah, I think just to build on what Margot said, we've learned a lot, I think, in the last 18 months. And I think one of the misconceptions that I'd like to break is that we need to make this push to return to a new normal. We've moved maybe 50 years right forward or something, right, in our ability to work differently, to work virtually, to communicate without being in person. It's something that 2 years ago nobody would have thought possible. Huge companies did not think they could ever flip this switch, right? And then overnight it happened, and we proved that we could do this. And so for me, it's the idea that we need to create or push to a new definition of normal. I don't think, as Griff said, it's an idea of done, right? It's an idea of let's really take this opportunity to understand what we've learned, and figure out how we can make that better as humans and have a better experience for everybody going forward, both employers and employees.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with all of you. I think there's an importance in speaking these myths out loud. I think we're all kind of maybe feeling them, or feeling that maybe others are thinking them. So speaking them out and talking to them and really debunking them is important. Given that there's all of this around our environment and our ecosystem, this is emotional, this is difficult, can be polarizing. Where do we start, and how do we do it? Erin, do you want to maybe start us off there?
Sure. I think we've touched on it a little bit before in this conversation, but there is a lot of emotion around this. And I think Anthony, you mentioned, or maybe Griff at the beginning, we've tried a lot of this on ourselves as a team at Thoughtium. And we're a small team, but it's proven to be really impactful, right? And so we've done a little bit of this work internally in the last couple of weeks. And I think the place to start is with listening, right? Everybody's been through some level of experience, maybe some would say some level of trauma in the last 18 months, and we're not quite done yet, right? So some of us are really excited to return back to a life that feels a little bit more like it felt before, and some of us are really working to unwind a little bit of what we've been living in the past 18 months. And so just giving people the ability to hear and speak kind of what they've lived and the experience, and where they're sitting right now, I think is really the right place to start. Because once you start listening, right, then you can start to build from there the path forward and the road to where you want to go as a team, or even as a company.
Yeah, thank you. What about you, Margot? What do you think is important in this beginning this work?
I think my tagline is definitely going to be with empathy and compassion, but I'm going to put an emphasis on compassion, because we can all have empathy and we can all care and see where someone else is coming from, but to care enough to react and listen in a way that you're willing to act on it, I think is really critical.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Griff.
So I'll plus one both of what Erin and Margot said, as just I know we're agreeing a lot, but spoiler alert, one of the things I'll mention is that we've learned a lot, and it hasn't all been roses in our conversation, and I think that's important to call out, because this is an emotional time. And I want to build on one thing that Erin said, this idea of giving people the space to think about what they've been through. I think a lot of us recognize that the past year has changed us. However, and I don't have data to back this up, but I wonder how many of us have actually taken the space just to really unpack how we've transformed and think about, what are the things we overcame? What are the things we learned about ourselves? We learned about our family. We learned about our work situation. And we learned what we could do. We talk a lot about superpowers. We unlocked a lot of those last year. We failed, we cried, we smiled, we learned a lot. And actually getting the chance to write some of those things down and then share them, not just in a Facebook post. And I'm not trying to call out social media here, but a chance to share those things with the people that you spend so much time with is a great place to start with an open stance. Because starting with an open stance and really feeling like you can bring your full self to this conversation is going to be so important. And the last thing I'll say, anyone who knows me knows that I love to speak in analogies, just the way that my brain works. And the one thing I've been telling a lot of companies that we're talking with is, don't let your fear of the bee sting scare you away too much of getting stung. And I think that's just around start the conversation, recognize it's going to be, equal parts vulnerable and scary and uncomfortable. But don't let your fear of what will happen after starting the conversation stop you from actually starting it.
I think that's great. I want to call into maybe tie the data into the ask that you're putting forth, Grift and Margot and Aaron. People don't feel like their companies care. And then you're asking companies to be vulnerable or people to be vulnerable and be, share their intimate details about their ups and downs during the last 18 months. How do we create the space that people can come into where they can speak to those and do it when authentically? Grift, I'll since you're in that space, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, part of it is seeing the right example across the organization. Like you have to see different people, the folks that you look up to, the folks who are leading business units, really show and demonstrate that vulnerability and willing to kind of step into some of the things that, some of the missteps they've made over the past couple of months. And I think we talk a lot about, acceleration and cyclicality of behavior. Like this is an example of, when you see the right things and you see leaders not just saying the right things, but then backing those up with action. I mean, the say-do ratio is so important here in terms of what you tell people to do and how you actually show up. So I think a big piece is getting everyone in the organization ready to show this, not just opening it up for certain parts. And the last thing I would say on that same front is putting together a couple of behavioral parameters around these discussions is really important. So we know it's going to be raw. We know it's going to be emotional. There are certain things that we just have to agree to with each other. Like we have to suspend judgment. Judgment is going to come to our minds. It's just naturally, we are human beings. We have to be willing to suspend that a little bit and to try to dig deeper into what people are saying rather than succumbing to the initial judgment that we might be having on what someone's saying or what someone's feeling.
Yeah. Margot, do you want to offer your perspective on this? How companies can show up?
Yeah. Again, empathy and compassion. I feel like a broken record.
Good.
I think by using some of the key ingredients that we're going to share with folks listening today, by hopefully modeling the behavior that we're modeling for you today, you can show up and just allow your employees to bring their whole selves from a place that is genuine and, non-judgmental. To Griff's point, I think creating that psychological safety is super important this is, I actually was reading something the other day and somebody referred to this discussion as being like an imprinting moment, like how this translates within your organization and the conversations that you have will either draw people in or it will push them away. And I think it's an imprinting moment. So you can either like do the work and be there, right? And make this a meaningful interaction, or you can rush back to normal and expect, for people to fall in line.
Yeah.
And, well, that works out for you.
I really like the concept of it being imprinting. I think you're right. I think there's a little bit of this this gravity that we're all feeling about the choices and the decisions we're making having a lasting impact, whether it's our generation or future generations. We're really redefining what work looks like, not for the next 6 months, but potentially the next 40, 50 years. And that's, you're right, important. When we think about this work, and a lot of it has to do about coming back. So, and being intentional about coming back into the physical space. So what does, or how do we redefine the in-person work experience with intention, inclusion, equity, and then elevate it just above, having bodies in a seat? Margot, you want to speak on it?
I do. And I want to plug Brene Brown and Priya Parker for actually inspiring us to have this conversation today, because I was listening to her podcast one morning, which I almost never have time to do because as a working mom, I'm always trying to do a million things at once and I can't So I was listening to this on 2 times speed, and I had to slow it down because I wanted to like actually digest what I was hearing. And the name of the podcast was The Art of Gathering. So how we return and why it matters. So it all kind of started with this podcast that allowed Thoughtium to create the space to have this discussion today. And I think that's the first ingredient or the first part of the equation for other companies to do the same. So just kind of creating the space, creating the psychological safety to engage in these discussions, and being intentional about it. So one of the things that kind of stopped me in my tracks when I was listening to the podcast was like, we need it to be better than it was before. And I like literally stopped what I was doing and I like hit the 15-second back rewind button, and we need it to be better than it was before. So, this is like a huge call to action from my part. And I'm almost like begging companies and people to engage in these discussions and to create the space to have these really critical discussions. Because if we just rush back to normal, then we will miss the once in a generation right? Like, we have the opportunity now to reshape what work looks like for ourselves and for future generations to come, because we've all been marching into the office with our, what used to be briefcase and now backpacks, and taking the metro downtown, and we've never questioned it. And now that we've overnight flipped a switch and done what people said could not be done, I think it's an opportunity for us, and really an obligation for our industry to explore this topic. But it's an opportunity for everyone to pause and just really think about like how we meet and why it matters, and to be super intentional about that. And I think, because society never really adjusted to a 2-person working household. I know, I shared on like a Chicago working moms group, and I was polling them, and a lot of people feel the same way. Caretakers, parents, people with pets, we all have this new flexibility to do our work from anywhere, WFA. So, society's never adjusted to that structure. So now that we've gotten used to having a little bit more of that flexibility, I think people are going to dig in their heels and really look for new opportunities. I know as a career mom, Erin can definitely speak to some of this.
Erin, what are your thoughts?
Formative for my parenting years, and as a working mother, I'd love to hear more about Erin's experience and how that's shaped her.
Yeah, I mean, I think women and working mothers are only one piece of the storyline, but a strong piece of the storyline. And we've seen in the last, there's data, although we didn't present it in detail today, but there is data about how many women have left the workforce in the last 18 months, and how many don't want to just flip back, right? And as Margot said, nobody questioned the way we were working before. And it wasn't really working for lots of us, but there weren't options. And so we were making it work. And I do really see this as an opportunity to learn something as humans, right? As people, to learn what could be different, and how can we support not only women and mothers, but how can we support all people, right? All humans who want to do good work, right? And be impactful and really contribute to their company's vision and mission, and really own that, but also do it in a way that allows them to live and have a little bit less anxiety and be a little bit more present, right? There's a real learning I think we can do here. And as Margot said, I think it could be really straightforward. I think it's about being intentional about how we gather. I do think there is work that is easier in person. I do think there's an enormous amount of value you get from being in person with people. I think people are missing that after being in their house by themselves or with the same 2 or 3 people, right, for the past, 12 plus months. There is a huge component about in person, but it doesn't have to be 9 to 5, 5 days a week, right? And I think we would see that if we planned our in-person gatherings with intention, that you'd get even more out of that from an employee standpoint, from a company standpoint, from a team building standpoint, than you would just telling everybody that they have to be back in the office 3 days a week.
So, we talked about what in person looks like internally, and we had a great discussion about it, but we also pulsed our community about what in person looks like for them. Erin, do you want to walk us through the poll that we saw?
Sure. When we ran this experiment, right, conversation internally a week or so ago, we really focused on a couple of key questions, right, just to kind of set the tone and see where people were at. What was better in person? What's worse in person? What has to be done in person, right? So just kind of redefining and kind of getting an idea of where people were coming from. And then we turned around and pulsed our community and asked them the same kind of question around what type do you feel of work must be done in person. Most people, right, half the people thought that internal collaboration really needed to be done in person. So that intentional time you spend with your team, with your management structure, whatever that looks like, right? Like real collaboration in person focused with an outcome is really important to people to do in person. And then they were split, right? There are reasons to be in person for maybe customer or stakeholder or really important meetings. We learned in the podcast that Margot was mentioning that I think there are really key, easy ways to manage important stakeholder meetings with a split workforce, right? I think the suggestion that really resonated with me out of that podcast was that if you have important meetings, you can facilitate those in a new way where you have an in-person host and a virtual host, and it's their co-responsibility to make sure that that meeting is managed equitably, right, and equally for both the people in the office and the people virtual. I think it's a really simple solution, right, and something that companies really might be able to try and might solve some of the fears people have about moving into a hybrid workforce.
Yeah. It's really interesting that, a lot of the times we're coming into the office, and this is, I can speak for myself. We were coming into the office, but I was sitting behind a computer and putting output through the computer and not really having the time or the space to interact in the way that I wish I could with my colleagues and coworkers. So being intentional about that, and I think focus work really stands out to me as, obviously it's 3% people think that focus work should be done in person. And I agree. I think that's the one that we don't have to do in person, and we probably shouldn't be doing in person. Excellent. Thank you. When we think about having these processes, listening to people, thinking about how do we make decisions with everyone's concerns and feelings heard and being understood, how do we create something, Grift, I'll kind of tee this up for you. How do we create something where we can commit to it, but then, how do we, if something doesn't work, how do we revisit that process?
Yeah, I think I would love to just speak to a little bit of the in-person and the commitment piece before getting into the revisit.
Sure.
One of the things you can even see in this data, you look at internal collaboration is, this is a great starting point, but I think we've been harping a lot on respecting people's perspective and how they're coming into the conversation and what they've been through. These are all different elements. You look at even this pie chart that need to be unpacked further. So when we say internal collaboration, not everything. I mean, we're not talking about Zoom meetings where you're getting status updates, 30 to 45 minutes. Like, we need to, as a team, really define what internal collaboration means for us. And again, this comes back to that co-authoring idea of how do we get into the behaviors, commitments we make that are related to how our work gets done. And so that a lot of that comes from our perspective that we're bringing, but also I think, one of the things that will continue to show up in these conversations we have is we can't we can't think of alignment as the need for 100% agreement. So we are not going to agree on everything that we come to alignment on, and that's okay. And that's kind of how debate and discussion works, right? And I will say, one of the things I like to tell customers as well is, teams that debate together innovate together. So we have to make sure that we're making the space for people to bring in that dissenting opinion. One of the things we've used internally is what we would call a pre-mortem tool, which is giving people the chance to put themselves into a future seat, in a seat of failure, which is uncomfortable. But what it does is it allows people to bring pragmatically those big worries and concerns they have. Oftentimes are related back to the beginning part of the conversation, right? What they've become used to, where they're bringing their full selves into the discussion. So creating that space for dissent not only is great for letting people feel heard, it's also statistically shown that if you create that space for dissent, you're going to come up with probably a good list of reasons why your strategy will fail. That's proven in data. Like, you'll actually get those reasons, and you can start again. You think of the co-authoring power there. Start to create some strategies together. How you'll either avoid stepping into those pitfalls or jump over those hurdles that are out in the future road. So I think that's a big piece. The other thing is, as part of this conversation, and I'll relate it back to one of the things we said at the very beginning around not being a finish line. We as organizations and we as teams need to really commit to spending time coming back and looking at these strategies we're putting together and saying, how is it going? And again, these are not going to be easy conversations either. These are going to be tough. These are going to be challenging. We're not all going to like everything that's said in them, but that's part of this. That's part of this process. And by having those hard conversations in pockets, we avoid the volcanic eruptions of only having them, say once a quarter or once a year, or whatever those feedback performance cycles we might have. So I think it's really important that we really commit to that revisiting strategy, and we all, make sure it's really known and explicitly talked about as part of this commitment we're making to bettering our workplace.
Yes, it's work.
True feedback loops on that too, so that it's not, it goes into radio silence and you don't know. There needs to be a feedback loop around this process so that people feel the psychological safety to say, hey, this is not working for me. It was, now things are not working and we need to readjust. So being able to revisit, but putting the platform out there for people to encourage that feedback.
Very valid point, Margot. So when we think about this experience that we did internally, and when we think about the people that are listening to this content now, what are some key learnings that we've gone through that we can share, and some call to action? Erin, I'll toss it over to you.
Yeah, I will just second everything kind of Griff and Margot just sort of summarized, right? For me, some of the key learnings are about listening and starting with trust and really creating that space. And then this idea of this commitment to revisit and knowing that we're not trying to get to a finish line of a September date or whatever that looks like, but that this is going to be an evolving kind of conversation that will be difficult, but ultimately will be really important to maintaining and growing your talent workforce in your company.
Thank you. Yeah, agreed. Margot, do you want to share your key learnings?
I do. I think it might have been Erin or Grift. Somebody said that managers, like, this is your time, whether you like it or not. I think it was Grift. And so, learning, and sometimes you take them on the chin, right? And one of the favorite things that I like to ask myself, thanks to my mom, is what have I learned from this experience? So thanks, Mom, if you're listening. So I think when you do revisit your hybrid strategy and see if it's working, have the comedic relief of hey, guys, that did not work out. Let's all laugh this off and move on and try something else. And by learning through these challenges, you have to lead with those learnings, right?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Margot. And Griff. Oh, go ahead. Didn't mean to cut you off.
Add to that, I think internally we were kind of talking about this, and other people will see it as well. Is the people who don't have the really critical people management skills are going to struggle when they have a workforce that is remote and a workforce that is physically in person, and some people that are hybrid. So, making sure that you're investing in your leaders, I think, is a really valid point to discuss as well, because if you don't support your management, they won't be able to support their workforce. So really investing in your management line to make sure that they're equipped to handle these conversations and
Yeah. These are unprecedented times. So like we're all trying to figure this out together, and they need as much support as we possibly can get. Grift, what do you want to add a little bit to that?
Well, it's gonna be. I don't think I'm gonna. It's gonna be tough trying to top both of those great culminations there. But I think one of the things that comes to mind for me that is a little bit of a build on those is I think transparency is just going to be much more important than stoicism. So let's just make sure that if we have conversations, I think people are going to respect hearing what you're actually feeling, what you're actually going through, more than seeing someone show up with like a really steely reserve. And being able to look like that, that strength in the thick of the storm. So just know, I think personally, what I've learned in this is real strength is being willing to say, like, I don't have the answers right now, and frankly, I feel uncomfortable. That's a big thing for me. And I think I'll build off what Margaret said around investing. I think, it's easy in times like this. One of the things a mentor of mine once told me, we talk about placing blame. When we point a finger at someone, there's generally three fingers pointing back at you. So let's try not to say, one thing is the root cause of a lot of our different challenges, but let's try to think about how we collectively work together to, face, whether it's a development gap or a strategy gap or a capability issue. I mean, these are things that we can collectively work on, as opposed to just trying to assess blame through like a rudimentary root cause analysis.
Yes. Absolutely. This has been such a great conversation. I really enjoyed all of our collective perspectives around this, and we did some incredible work internally to be able to speak on it. This is, and to be able to do that work with you guys has been really great, and I appreciate that. Again, this is the second episode for our series. We are going to have the third and final episode of the series for the We Work in Progress virtual roundtable series, and the last one is going to be about leadership insights. Grift, do you want to tee us up a little bit for the next episode?
Yeah, so I am going to be graciously taking the microphone from Anjana and serving as host in our final episode here. And we're going to have the amazing Madison Wright joining to talk a little bit about where learning and development plays a role in this. But I think at a broader level, how do we think about how we go forward and develop ourselves in a perpetual beta state, which means we always know that we're going to be making changes and tweaks and continuously improving. I think we've known that forever, but how do we continue to emphasize that, in the wake of all the challenges and the opportunities we have ahead of us?
Perfect. Thank you, Grift. And of course, this is part of our Perspectives series. Excited to bring that to you guys. And of course, housed in it is our Navigating Now series. So interesting ways to talk about this stuff and other supportive topics surrounding business. Very excited. Until next week, bye.